Very good. Well, we're glad to have you here to what I think is our first webinar in the first month of the new year. And we're anxious to hear thoughts about an empathy-driven response to COVID-related behavior. The panelists today will help us look at ways to empathize with patrons, colleagues, and be kind to each other as well through this stressful time. The past year was challenging, to say the least. And our speakers today will help us be extra mindful of how our interactions are perceived. They have lots to share with us about how to empathetically work with our patrons, especially when it comes to having to continue to enforce COVID guidelines even into this new year. So our panelists join us from Waterloo Public Library. We have Morgan Gleason, who has been working in libraries for 6 years and just recently received her master's in library science just a year ago. She loves working with the community and building relationships with patrons. We have Kim Camarata. She is a former high school Spanish teacher and currently at the Waterloo Public Library as a library assistant. Megan Capek is here, also with Waterloo. She went to the University of Northern Iowa and studied nonprofit management while she was there. And India Johnson is a technical assistant at Waterloo Public. She enjoys troubleshooting tech issues with staff and patrons. She has been at Waterloo Public Library since 2007. So we're so grateful to have you here today to lead us through an empathy-driven response to COVID behavior, and I'll let you take it over.
Thank you. Okay, so hi, everybody. So we are going to talk about an empathy-driven response to COVID-related behavior. And just some housekeeping before we get started. At the end of the presentation, we will be sharing a link to our slide deck. So you'll have all of that. And we have a lot of resources in here that we've gathered. Some we're going to address in depth, some we might mention, some we might not mention. If a word's underlined, it's got a link attached to it. So if you're looking for more information on something we have or on a slide that we have, just click that link and you can follow through to that. So to get started, my name is Morgan Gleason, and my pronouns are she, her.
I'm Kim Camarata, and my pronouns are also she, her.
I'm India Johnson, and my pronouns are also she and her.
And I'm Megan Capek, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm just going to go through a quick overview of what we're talking about today. Several of us attended this webinar that's listed at the bottom, how to deal with problem-related behavior due to COVID-19. It was presented by Ryan Dowd. We'll hear more about him later. We were super impressed by the tools and the strategies he outlined. So we were inspired to share a review of that webinar with our staff. And then after that, we were very excited and we continued to compile resources, which turned into this presentation. So we're not the experts, but we're hoping to help continue the spread of useful information and helpful tools. And that's our goal today. So here we go.
So we wanted to start by just defining empathy for everybody, just so we're kind of all on the same page. So empathy is the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and voraciously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of another, of either the past or present, without having feelings, thoughts, and experience fully communicated in an objectively explicit manner. Basically, what that means is it's the capacity to understand or feel what another person's experiencing. So it's really just being able to understand another person and feel what they're feeling, and then acting on that. So there is a link over to the left to an article that goes a lot more in depth on what is empathy and how to grow it. The article is focused oddly like in the IT world. I found a lot of studies on empathy in the IT world, but a lot of that information does translate to our field or to just building empathy in general. So I wanted to share some tools with you on how to build empathy as well. So you have friendship is a great way to build empathy. You are experiencing things with another person, especially with friends that don't have the same background as you. Storytelling and reading, I loved seeing those in there, are great ways to really just put yourself in another person's perspective, whether it's fiction, nonfiction. There's a ton of research about how reading really builds empathy in children, but it can also grow empathy in adults as well. So keep reading. And then meditation, that reflective moment that you have with yourself, really helps you build empathy because it really helps you turn inward. And we have on the right side of the screen, 2 quizzes. So there's the implicit bias quiz, which I love. It's from Harvard University. And what it does is there's quizzes that you can go through and take, and it shows you what your implicit bias is. And it's a great starting point for what you need to work on. There's also the empathy quiz tool, which kind of gives you an idea of how empathetic you are and what you can do to grow your empathy if you need to. My biggest suggestion is be completely honest when taking these 2. You don't have to share the results with anybody. The more honest you are, the more you know where you're coming from, and the better you can build that empathy and use those results to help grow where you are. None of us are perfect. So both of those are quizzes that I would definitely suggest taking.
I think it's also worth noting that all of the tools we're sharing aren't one-time resources. Building empathy, like anything, takes time. And so these quizzes are good resources to come back to even and reflect on your progress. That's how I like to use them. So
Morgan did a fantastic job explaining what empathy is. Empathy is not sympathetic. Empathetic is about being able to understand. Many of us are in a situation or in a position that we are all fixers. If you're at the library, you want to fix people. But empathy is about listening. The technique of listening and just empathizing with individuals is very important, and also validating. We want sometimes to remove the pain or remove the situation, but more so we should learn to just validate that they are having this feeling, understanding. A lot of times our patrons are coming in with situations we really have no clue about, but we can just be able to just listen to them and validate their feelings when they're coming into our buildings. So this beautiful chart kind of breaks down the big words of sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Again, sympathy, I feel your hardship, conveying the feelings that individuals are dealing with the situations, and just recognizing that another's hardship and their sorrow. Compassion, I can relieve your suffering and alleviate the experience. But again, we're really trying to focus on the empathy level, when we are dealing with our patrons, dealing with our customers, understanding their emotions and the experience, and trying to see yourself more so in the situation than trying to fix the situation. Brené Brown had a wonderful TED Talk that I kind of pulled this empathy fuels connection, sympathy drives disconnection. Amazing TED Talk, really cute. If you click on the link, she'll take you into that TED Talk. And then on our resource page is also her YouTube. Definitely take a look. But I think that this quote really drives the way that we deal with our patrons, deal with our customers, connecting with one another. When you been in this field, you build relationships. But we don't want to disconnect from, some of the realities that a lot of them are dealing with.
So one thing we wanted to work on or to mention in discussing discussing the fact that we're stressed is burnout. And we included it in our outline and then realized it was a massive topic. So we just kind of wanted to mention it because that is something that people have been experiencing this past year and probably this coming year. And so we have some resources over to the right that discuss ways to prevent burnout. And we really focused on boundaries and also institutional changes, because that's one of the biggest places that I think we could really work on fixing burnout. So if you have any interest in those are the articles right there that we came across during our research. But what we do want to expand on is emotional bandwidth. This is a term that we've been talking about probably for the past quarter of a year within our group. It's a term I really enjoy. So emotional bandwidth is the ability to know how you are honestly feeling in a given moment. It also includes accepting responsibility for your energy management, which is understanding the limit to the amount of information your system can handle. So it's really just understanding how much emotional energy you have to give, understanding your emotional elasticity. One of the examples that we worked with was a rubber band. So you can stretch a rubber band so far, and then it breaks. And that's a really big issue. You can also stretch a rubber band and it pulls and pulls, and then it runs out of elasticity. So if you stretch it too much, too often, hitting your boundaries too often, you're going to lose some of that emotional elasticity. So you really want to be mindful of how far you're pulling that rubber band, be mindful and honest about your boundaries, and understand what you need, but also understand what that everybody is dealing with less emotional elasticity right now. So 2020 has hit everybody. So your coworkers are dealing with it. A big thing is your patrons are dealing with it. We all have less to give right now. And so starting in a place of empathy really makes it so we are not causing issues down the road. We're doing a little more work right now so that down the road, we're not out of emotional bandwidth. One thing that I always remember is, as public librarians or as librarians in general, we're public servants. We're here to serve the community, but we're not public doormats. So we're not meant to be walked all over. So that's kind of the definition that we're working with for emotional bandwidth.
And there's a comment that we're going to continue on, but the question was, is there ever a point when you do have to disconnect for your own mental health, or because that person keeps coming back over and over again for empathy? Yes, definitely. We're going to talk about some other terms that delve into that as well, but I think that healthy boundaries allow us to come back the next day and continue our empathetic response. So we just wanted to address that. So our next term related to that is collective empathy. Collective, in the way that we're using it, is things considered as a group or a whole, involving all members of a group, or something that's shared or assumed by the members of the group, like the collective opinion of the staff, for example. This term sometimes shows up in research, but it wasn't quite exactly as we were utilizing it today. So our working definition for the purposes of the presentation is a collaborative response based on understanding of shared or similar experiences or traumas, like a global pandemic. So that's where we're coming.
Collective empathy in the workplace. So when, we're all kind of in this boat together, and we're all sharing a similar emotions, feelings, and building relationship with your coworkers can make the process a little bit easier. You building these dialogues, having these conversations with your coworkers in your workplace. A lot of us are working from home, some are working in the building. You kind of want to feed off certain type of energy and build and foster good relationships, and you kind of build that empathy within the workplace. Bring those incidents or those situations to your coworker and be able to talk about it. Pitch ideas off each other. That's very important. And just check in with one another. I think that's definitely important. When your coworker is coming in this morning, not knowing what their situation is, but look at their energy. Sometimes they might need a break. Walk in and just say, listen, I got this situation, or I got this curbside, I'll go ahead and take care of that. I think that is imperative, especially at this time where things are so loose and we don't know what may happen the next day or next week. So collective empathy in the workplace is essential.
We also noted through one of the articles that we found that collective empathy in a group helps foster problem solving. You think better, you innovate better, you have more trust when you start with empathy. So thank you, India.
So one other thing that we wanted to mention, and this kind of falls in the realm of burnout, is looking at trauma-informed care. And that's something that we are, even here, we're doing more research on that. And looking at trauma-informed care as an organization, and building a culture that really nurtures people who have gone through a trauma, which we kind of have all gone through a collective trauma of 2020. So we wanted to we found some really good resources in our research. So if you click on the link at the top, it'll take you to an article on trauma-informed care. This image also came from that link, and it just kind of walks you through kind of how to create an environment or an organization that really helps their employees go through this trauma. And it also, even if you aren't in charge of creating that environment, you can act in certain ways that do help with that. So we wanted to include it. We wanted to recognize that trauma of 2020.
So to kind of tie all of these things together with the rubber band, we recognize that our emotional bandwidth is all stretched. We're acknowledging that it's a collective trauma. And then our goals are to gather tools so that we can react with empathy and to help prevent further stress down the road.
So what in the world was 2020? There was a lot going on in that year, not just in libraries, but obviously in the world. It was hard. It was hard on all of us. Here at the Waterloo Public Library, we went from being open, business as usual, to all of a sudden our programs were canceled. And then we closed to the public and we were all working still from the building. And then we were all working from home. And then we came back and kind of started doing some curbside services. And then we added computer appointments. And then we added browsing. And then we opened the doors and everything, like, to a limited number of patrons to come in and browse. And then in Blackhawk County, our risk went up to high and we closed down again. So since the end of October, we've only been offering curbside services for materials, copying, printing, faxing, notary. But it's been a lot. We've been on that little roller coaster there in that picture. And it's been hard, but we have done some things to try to, relieve the stress, kind of get to know each other better. It's a pretty big building, so we don't always work interdepartmentally as much, I think, as some of the smaller libraries do. But this has allowed us to get closer, not physically, but, and a couple fun things we did. Our director had us send him pictures of things, just random things in our house. And then we had to guess whose thing was whose. And we had an ugly mask contest. So we've been doing things kind of throughout to try to build connection between us. But we'd also like to see what others have been doing. We've all had difficulties, we've all adapted, and I'm sure we've all had success. So feel free at this point in the chat to share anything that you've been doing that you think is innovative or would be helpful to other libraries.
Also, just so you know, we are going to, as I said, we're going to share a link to our presentation, and there is a link at the end to all of our sources. So that was asked in the chat.
Does anybody have anything to share? I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
We can continue with the presentation, but of course, continue to share, please, with each other.
So one resource that I have leaned on heavily in this pandemic, and just in life in general, is podcasts. And my sister-in-law introduced me to Adam Grant, not personally, but she's doing some graduate work in organizational psychology right now, which I didn't even realize was a thing, but it is, and it's fascinating. Look into it if you're interested in creating the kind of work environment that fosters creativity and things like that. But Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist. He has a podcast called Work Life, and it's wonderful. I recommend it highly. And I was listening not too long ago to an episode called We Don't Have to Fight Loneliness Alone. He put it out in May of this year, and it was really just good stuff in there, because we were all kind of alone, but we don't have to be. So he told the story during this podcast. It's Adam Grant. Sorry, I just saw in the chat. His name is Adam Grant. This quote is from him during this episode of the podcast. When he was in his first year of graduate work, it was the winter break, and he was just feeling really alone. He was in a different state than his family and friends. He didn't know anybody at school yet very well, so he decided over his first winter break to make a list of the 100 people who meant the most to him in life. And then he sent them all a note, an email or a physical note, just telling them how much they meant to him. And he said what he learned was it doesn't take a lot of effort to go from feeling lonely to feeling connected, even if it's from a distance. And I thought that was wonderful just to hear that, because I'm an introvert. I think a lot of us are in library work. We like to lose ourselves in books, but I still need connection with people. So to know that it doesn't take much sometimes to connect it's really helpful. And making connections with patrons, we all know, is a really important part of library work. At the beginning of the pandemic, all these celebrities were putting out videos talking about how we're all in the same boat and, we're all in this together. And I came across this saying that, like, yes, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And I think that's really important to remember when dealing with patrons, is that at least all of us here in Waterloo, and I think most of us here in this webinar right now, we're still employed. We still have our jobs. And I know from talking to a lot of patrons, they don't. A lot of them don't. So it's hard to remember sometimes, like when patrons come in and they're agitated or they're irritable or they're calling, trying to get services. It's hard to remember that they're dealing with different things. We're all dealing with different things. And we have this same storm kind of raging above us, but we have all of us have different circumstances. So one big thing that I've learned in the last year, I've done a lot of, I'm on a big personal development kick anyway. So I started researching relationships. And I found Dr. John Gottman and Dr. Julie Gottman. We'll talk about them a little bit more later. He talks about the 5-to-1 magic relationship ratio, which is for every negative interaction. And the Gottmans focus primarily on marriage, but this is broadly applicable to all relationships. For every negative interaction you have with someone, you need at least 5 positive interactions to kind of balance it. And we talked about Ryan Dowd a little bit. We're going to talk about him more, but he has the pennies in the cup scenario, where every interaction you have with somebody can either be a penny in your cup or it takes pennies out of your cup. A smile at a patron, telling them good morning, introducing yourself, those are all positive interactions. Those are all pennies in your cup. But the minute you have to ask them to quiet down, or I mean, anything negative that you have to ask them to do, remind them that their computer time is almost up, that's a negative, and that takes at least 5 pennies out of your cup. So finding empathy is hard, but developing relationships and remembering the magic relationship ratio of positives to negatives, I think, can go a long way in helping us create that empathy and rapport. And now Morgan is going to take us into a 3-step process with Ryan Dowd.
So we've mentioned Ryan Dowd a couple times, and he, just to give you an overview, he is an executive director of Hess House, which is a large homeless shelter outside of Chicago, Illinois. He also runs the Homeless Training Institute. He does a lot of work with kind of helping librarians understand where homeless people are coming from, and that information really helps at least us understand the population that we are actively serving, which is usually the population that needs us the most. So I wanted to give you guys some tools and share this 3-step process that we learned, and kind of give you an idea of how we've put it into action. So these are kind of the physical tools. I've seen a couple of people ask in the chat, you know, how do you show empathy? Like, how do you put this into action? And these are kind of the steps that have really helped me do that. So the first step is when someone first comes in, and I'm going to use the example of they forgot their mask, but I have used this in so many different scenarios when someone comes in and I need them to follow some certain rules. So the first step is assume they made a mistake, assume they forgot their mask, assume they didn't know the rule, or just forgot it. Like that, all of us have forgotten our mask. I walked into the grocery store the other day and forgot my mask. Like, it's more of a habit now, but it happens. And give a friendly reminder, a genuinely friendly reminder. In this step, you really want to be sure to watch your body language and your tone. That was really, really big for me. So you want to ask, hey, did you forget your mask? Rather than, I think you forgot your mask. Like, there are definitely ways, and you know what you're doing when you ask them if they forgot their mask, and that sets your entire conversation with that person up. If you can be genuinely friendly, smile through your mask, we've talked about that a couple of times, that's going to get you points with that person.
Pennies in your cup.
Yes. And get you in a situation where they are going to want to do what you want them to do. So in my experience, this works a lot. It doesn't always work. So if step 1 doesn't work, if you can't get them to wear their mask, we move on to step 2, which is where the person is inconvenienced. Sorry. So you've asked, the person didn't just forget their mask, but they are still pushing against wanting to do this, the first thing that you're going to want to do is blame the rules. It's a city ordinance here in Waterloo. So I've looked at people and I've said, I'm sorry, we're just enforcing city rules. You can also personalize the risk. I've had a little, it kind of depends. A lot of times we can say, or I'll say, hey, could you pull your mask up for me? Just a quick little, please do this for me. And that can work. But if they push back against that, I also find that blaming the rules really helps. And sympathize with them. You don't have to believe it. Just say, I'm sorry, I know this sucks. I feel ya. I don't like wearing it either. Hearing that really helps, whether you mean it or not. But again, stay genuine. Watch your tone, watch your body language, and stick to the rules. You need to stay genuinely friendly through all of this or it doesn't work. And then if this still doesn't work, I've had a handful of people get to step 3, which is where the rules are conflicting with their values. This is not the time to make a stand. Don't take it personally, and remember your goal in all of this. Your goal is to get them to follow the rules. That was huge for me to understand. Your goal is to get them, say, to follow this rule. So to wear a mask inside this building. It is not to get them to wear a mask throughout the rest of their day. That's somebody else's job. Your job is to get them to follow the rules that you have in this building. And that's where you need to come from. You don't need to change their views. You don't need to provide them with facts on why wearing a mask is good for you. You just need to get them to do it here. So you're going to want to try to sidestep the argument. Don't get into an argument about needing to stay 6 feet away or why the library is closed. Just say, I'm sorry. I know it's inconvenience. Sympathize with them. And then if they're really not going to wear a mask, or if they're really not going to, or if they're going to continue fighting with you, provide alternatives. So here at the library, we have a curbside. So make sure that they know what's available to them. Even when our library opened, we had offered curbside. So whatever it is your library is offering, make sure that they know that. And again, stay genuinely friendly through this entire process, even if they're yelling at you. And also throughout this entire process, don't forget that you can tag someone else in. So you can say, hey, this isn't working. I need to tap out and go get somebody else, whether it's a manager or just another person. I've had so many experiences where another person, same level as me, comes in, says the same thing. That person listens. They just needed to hear it from somebody else. That can help immensely as well. It has nothing to do with you, just has to do with the situation. So I wanted to give you guys an example of kind of a conversation I've had a lot, which is the phone call of, are you open? And this works for any sort of situation where someone is asking for something about being open or a service that isn't standard anymore. So don't just say no. Technically, legally, that's right. We're not open. But it sounds like you're shutting that person down. What I've started doing is, and what we've all started doing is responding with, well, the building's closed right now. So we're not open to the public, but we're doing as much as we can. What services are you looking for? So instead of just saying we're offering curbside services, we try to say, what services are you looking for? Because this allows them to have a conversation with us. So I found a lot of people just aren't 100% sure what curbside means. And our curbside also includes faxing, scanning, and printing. And so a lot of times people say, well, I wanted to come and print something. And so then I get to respond, well, can you email it to us? And most people can. And then we can get it printed for them through curbside. it's not always going to work. We can't always help everybody with how things are because that's just the nature of being shut down. If you still can't help, be apologetic. Say, I'm really, really sorry. Unfortunately, we are not able to safely provide that service right now. And please check back. That's the other thing, please just allow them to check back with us. But really making sure that you are having that conversation, being patient, taking a breath, and again, double checking with your emotional bandwidth and making sure you're in the place that you can have that conversation. But yeah, those are kind of the tools and the steps that we've been using that I really have found helpful through this time. So then I think we're going to talk about empathy in our relationships.
Yes, we're going to talk about empathy in our working relationships because that is also huge right now and always. In that same podcast that I listened to, the Adam Grant podcast about loneliness and how we don't have to deal with it alone, he talked to a woman named Dr. Jane Dutton. She's a co-founder and core faculty at the Center for Positive Organizations. Again, I didn't know these kinds of things existed. That's at the University of Michigan in the Ross School of Business there. And she said during that podcast, in every interaction we have with other people, we can leave a trace that makes that person better off. And I, in my own life as a teacher, a former teacher, I knew that to be very true. And it's also really scary because the opposite is also true. In every interaction we have with other people, we can leave a trace that makes them worse off. So I think we need to be mindful of that because, again, we're all going through a lot right now. And patron behavior is one thing, but coworker behavior is a very different animal sometimes. We are all going through a lot right now, but even among our coworkers, it's not all the same. We feel like sometimes it is because we have the same working experience generally, but we're all dealing with different things outside of the library. And we all have different thresholds for irritation and we all have bad days. Sometimes I need to not deal with something, and that's okay because I know that I have coworkers that I can look to for help and support. Just calling back to this collective empathy in the workplace, remember, like, to trust your coworkers. That's what fosters problem solving and innovative thinking. If we can't trust, then we need to build those relationships. A lot of this is just relationship building. Let's see. And okay, can we go to the next slide, Megan?
Yeah.
Thanks. And I'm going to call back to the Gottman Institute because it's not always easy. And I saw this come up in the chat just now. How can we express that to a coworker who may not react positively? And I think we need to set ourselves up for success that way. We need to have conversations with each other. We need to find that person in the library we know we can depend on, even if it's one or two people, to back us up. But back to relationship building in the Gottman Institute. Like I said, John and Julie Gottman were mostly focused on marriage relationships, but they also have a section on their website about about work relationships. And there was a managing conflict in work relationships section where they talk about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in a relationship. And those are contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I mean, those are pretty heavy words and those are pretty heavy emotions. So we need to be careful how we respond to each other and how we approach each other. Instead of viewing something that a coworker does as just, I mean, rolling your eyes is not a great way to interact with anybody, but try to think about where they may be coming from. Be compassionate. Remember that they might be dealing with something outside of work that they're not comfortable telling you about. I know we all sometimes have complaints, but instead of criticizing, put forth why, like take personal responsibility in conflicts. Any part in a conflict that you may have had, make sure that you own up to that, because that shows other people that you are recognizing your part. Defensiveness isn't helpful because that's just blaming other people usually. You get defensiveness, you make excuses for why something happened, and stonewalling, just shutting down, isn't going to have a positive outcome either. So be careful how you express your frustration. You do need to express your frustration. I get that, but remember that, I mean, the 3-step process that Morgan just went through from Ryan Dowd is kind of applicable here too. And the pennies in the cup, all of it. It's really kind of universal.
I will also chime in and just say, I think it's very important to make sure you do have boundaries, because sometimes, you can only do what you can for yourself. Trying to change somebody's attitude, or, you can't do that. You can still be compassionate for yourself. Somebody's going to have a bad day. They might keep that energy all day negative. That doesn't mean you have to co-sign on that. You can still stay positive, because your interactions do reflect when you are in the public or when you're dealing with customers. And your one coworker can literally unravel that if they're having a bad day. You don't have to receive that. So I think empathy and being compassionate in your space is truly important.
And one thing
that analogy. I don't have to co-sign with your negativity.
Correct.
I really
that
like
goes
that
back
too.
to emotional bandwidth as well.
Absolutely.
And one thing that the Gottmans didn't mention in this part anyway was showing appreciation. That can go so far in creating relationships and fostering relationships. I mean, just a week or two ago, I noticed that one person I was working with curbside a lot, she always had bags out ready to go. And I just mentioned it. Like, I love working with you because you always have bags out and ready to go. And since then, she's been more positive with me. I mean, it's the tiniest little thing, but it can make a huge difference. So be empathetic, be compassionate, but also be those things for yourself. And calling back to asking for help if you need it. If you need support, try to let somebody know. Like, if you come in and you're having a bad day, let somebody know and just say, I may not be able to deal with this certain patron today if they call. Or, I mean, another thing for Brene Brown, India mentioned Brene earlier. I heard her talk about one time how she and her husband have the number system, and they're like what percentage they're at in their, like, in themselves, what they have to offer of themselves that day. And it always needs to add up to 100%. So sometimes, like, they're both at 80 and things are great. And sometimes one of them has had a really busy week and they're exhausted and they're only at about 20%. And they just let the other one know that they may need to kick it up that day, so they can get up to 100% and really, like, be a partnership.
We've got some really great comments in the chat, so continue to share, please.
Yes.
One of our biggest goals in doing this presentation was to share helpful tools and resources. The miracle is this: the more we share, the more we all have. From our favorite Spock, Leonard Nimoy. So we've got a few slides here. We've got our sources. The underline, again, is a link to a Google Doc, which has a bunch of our sources listed in it, as well as a few of the photos there. The Librarian's Guide to Homelessness was mentioned earlier in the chat as well. It was written by Ryan Dowd, who's underneath the book. We have Adam Grant is the top right, and underneath that is John and Julie Gutman. So this, again, it will be available to you as a resource. You'll be able to click the links. We wanted to share some of our favorite resources as well. We didn't necessarily use all of these in the presentation, but we all have our favorites. So these are some of ours. And again, all of the underlined words are links to what they are. This gives us a good time to jump into your resources. Please share in the chat. We're going to just pause for a little bit of time here for you to share other resources that are your favorites, the first thing that comes to mind. Also, feel free to email us in the next couple of days if you have further resources. We're using the contact mgleason@waterloopubliclibrary.org. Those resources that we received from you, both in the chat and in email, are going to get put on this slide with those hyperlinks. So when you have access to the slides at the end, if you check back, you'll be able to see your coworkers' resources as well and your peers. Somebody remind me what NNLM means.
This is Sam on,
Thank you.
Stacy put in the chat, National Network Libraries of Medicine.
Perfect. While we give you a chance to add your own resources, we can jump back to this slide really quick. We've mentioned podcasts a couple of times. We have Brene Brown and Adam Grant. Their podcasts are on here. The Emotional Bank Account is from the Gottman Institute. That's a YouTube channel. And How to Tap into Our Collective Empathies is a series of TED Talks that Ted put together. Morgan, did you want to mention Ryan's newsletter?
Yeah, so Ryan Dowd has a newsletter that you can sign up for. He sends it out about once a week. It doesn't really clog up your email. It just is some great tips. So there's a link there if you want to sign up for that. I get excited when I get his emails once a week.
They're very
helpful. It's good information. It all makes you think. So yeah, go sign up if you want to.
A couple of the resources that were shared in the chat are the Anxiety First Aid Kit book by Rick Hansen et al. And What's Your Grief podcast also deals with COVID-related grief. Mm-hmm. Who does the What's Your Grief podcast? We'll just get that for you as a resource as well. And let's talk about our tools.
So we tried to give you some real actionable tools. Remember to start with empathy. Lean on your coworkers if you can. And if you can't, then find somebody else that you can maybe text in the middle of the day and say, I need support right now. And find someone that you can lean on. But coworkers, usually when you explain the situation, are willing to step in. And be that for your coworkers too. Be the person who steps in. Speaking as a teacher, I know proximity, as a former teacher, proximity can make a big difference. And so if I've seen a coworker dealing with a patron who seems to be getting a little agitated, I'll sometimes just go stand 10 feet away, just so they know that somebody is there, backing my coworker up. Smile through your mask. I think it was Tyra Banks who always said to smile with your eyes. Click back through this presentation. I know we mentioned it, but remember that all of the underlined phrases you can click on for more information or for resources.
I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat. So the link I'm sending out is going to be a link to our presentation that you can go through. I think it'll also be sent out later. So I did just send out that link.
Thanks, Morgan. Share resources with your peers. If they didn't attend this webinar, but you think something might be helpful, let them know about it. Remember the 3-step process, Ryan Dowd's 3-step process. Assume that they made a mistake first. That's always a good place to start. And explore your emotional limits, but don't explore too far. Keep your boundaries. Just keep an eye on yourself too, and where you are, and know where you're at, where your limits and your boundaries are.
Key takeaways, we've talked about emotional bandwidth. We're all stretched thin. We are all dealing with some personal things outside of the workplace. And sometimes we bring that energy into our building. So, just be mindful of that. We have given you a lot of tools that you can use a lot. Choose one, choose a couple, just something that you can have in your back pocket when you need to use it. And you use it throughout the years, there have been some great resources that have been even tagged in the chat. Take one, get a new podcast. React with empathy, that's the word of the day, use it, because everybody is dealing with a lot of different stresses, and that is going to impact how you build relationships with your coworkers, with your patrons, customers, and every day. So just be mindful of that.
And I noticed that Bonnie put in the chat, with so many small libraries in Iowa with few staff, in many cases just one person staff, consider state library staff as your empathy pals along with other nearby library staff. And I meant to mention this. I follow Library Talk religiously, and I'm a lurker. I'm usually a lurker in like social media, but I get a lot out of reading Library Talk. And I recognize a lot of names here today. So do reach out to other people in your area or at the state library for support, or me. I love talking to people. And
our emails are listed, so if you want
or any of
reach
us,
out,
yes.
definitely.
Yeah.
Our favorite Ryan Dowd is "Empathy is the answer."
Hold on.
And
I've become kind of a Ryan Dowd groupie. So I have the t-shirt that says empathy is the answer. I kind of love it.
So at this time, if you have any other questions, reactions, responses, things to share. Samantha, do you have anything?
I was just going to hop on and just, you guys reiterated what Bonnie said once, and I'll just do that again. I know we had one comment early in the presentation from someone who is not getting support from their city, who can be another great sort of resource for you as you're going through some of these difficult times. But if you're kind of at loggerheads with your city administration, the state library is here to be a resource for you all as well. And so if you need to contact your district consultant for ideas on building that relationship or navigating those difficulties, I would encourage you to reach out in that context as well. So I don't know specifically if that answers the question that came up earlier, but I did just want to acknowledge that can be a resource, kind of what we were saying with Ryan Dowd of sort of blame the rules. But if your city is not supporting you in that, then that for certainly is a challenge. So the state library is here to help you navigate that as well, if needed. And I'm loving these resources in the chat as well. I see a couple great podcasts and TED Talks. And I know for me during this season, podcasts and audiobooks have been just a great resource. I will say the state library is doing a Big Ideas book discussion next month on the book called Wintering. Let me see if I can find the link. It's been in a lot of places. That is a lot of kind of about self-care in difficult times. And so if you've read it or you might be interested in it, let me see. Here's an NPR review that I think was pretty positive. Sign up for the Big Ideas book discussion next month because we're going to kind of dig into that a little bit too. So yes, February 19. So Bonnie says in chat.
Yeah, and we'll add all of these to that slide.
Yeah.
So if you've missed something, it'll be there.
Good. Yeah, I listened to the audio. It was fantastic. And I see others in the chat are saying they've read it too. So that's been very good. It was good to read it in winter. I don't know, some books are kind of seasonal for me. It was like, it wouldn't have been one to read on the beach necessarily. It was a good one to read at, during my sort of the quiet hour I usually enjoy in the morning before my son gets up and all the crazy starts. But
Thank you for sharing all of the great resources.
I'm going to look at these.
We'll
I also want to mention just thank you for everyone sharing their experiences too. I think those are very helpful. Those just, we're all dealing with different situations, but it's good to know that people are dealing. So thank you for sharing those. Those are great to read and to understand and empathize so many different levels. So appreciate you guys sharing those.
Yes. Yeah. It's, I know it can be kind of weird to throw your story out there to 100 odd people on a webinar. But I think this is a great example of how our community supports one another. And also thank you to the Waterloo Public Library team here for stepping out of a comfort zone in some ways today, maybe to share this stuff with us. So they had originally submitted this as an ILOC session, and it didn't totally fit with our ILOC theme, but I thought this information is too good to pass up. And so I'm very excited that they came on today to do that. So I think for all of us, a chance to sort of step back and evaluate has been really helpful. And Bonnie, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, just my thanks to the Waterloo team for doing this first webinar in the first month of the new year. This is a great way to launch our continuing education menu for the coming year. So thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for letting us share.